So we started off with the box. We started off with the rules that reflect values that become your first code of ethics, and what we'll learn later on in the semester is called your social contract. Last week we talked about the principles by which we develop theories that enable us to judge the values we want to encase in law or the rules or the code of ethics. So I'm going to ask you today as a way of review, because you have a quiz at the end of this week, what are the two principles we talked about last week? Motive, action, and consequence. What are the two principles? Of course, you're going to be taking your test without your notes. So I'm just kind of curious if anybody... Go ahead, dear. Thank you.
Teleology.
Teleology. Is that written down?
Yeah.
Teleology. That's okay. Teleology. Teleology is concerned with the consequences of behavior. If the action produces a desired consequence, we're going to call it a good action. However, the upside of every theory has a downside. We're going to talk about those today. Today we're going to get into theory. What is the other principle that we use?
Deontology.
Deontology, where the action is what's important regardless of the consequence. It becomes your moral duty. Teleology, the root word in the Greek is telos. Ology means the study of. Telos, which is ends or products or consequences. Deontology, the root word is deontos, which is duty. Immanuel Kant says that your moral duty is what's important. The right thing at the right time, all the time. That has an upside until we get to, do you have 20 Jews in your basement? Or what do you do if you're a fire person and a building's completely consumed in fire and you cannot go upstairs and save the 3-year-old girl? You have to accept the consequences whether you like it or not. Everybody with me on that? So we use both theories. We're all teleological by nature. It's built into us. We do things for purposes even when the purposes are irrelevant. Some of us choose deontological behavior as a way of life. We're called first responders. Some of us find ourselves in deontological situations and we have to make a choice. Do we want to respond deontologically or not? Those of you that are first responders have no choice. And the law protects you. It's called the Good Samaritan law. We'll get into that when we get further into the law in this course. Other than that, those of us that aren't deontological by choice, we can make that choice, but we have to make it with wisdom, people. I'm military trained, you're bleeding out, I can try and stop you the same way as a medical person can. I can get sued because I have no legal protection. Therefore, say this probably for the rest of the semester. Ethics equals the law. Now, ethics is not the same as morality. I have a professor friend, we talked about this one day, and he thought maybe the law equaled morality. It doesn't, and we'll get to this again towards the end of the semester. Ethics needs a value. The law needs a value, and we're going to call that ethics. Morality, we're going to find later on in the semester, is from within. It's your moral conscience. So once in a while we find laws that we don't agree with and we try and change the law. And that's because the moral conscience tells us it's unfair. Slavery. Women were property of their husbands. In 1920, when you got the right to vote, it wasn't about voting. You couldn't be property and own property at the same time, and you couldn't vote without owning property. And so when you got the right to vote, you suddenly not only had a right to have a voice in government, you were suddenly no longer anybody's property. The old legacy pattern, why do you take your husband's last name? That's an old legacy property, value of property. You took your husband's last name. Before 1920, you couldn't divorce your husband. You belonged to them. We find upsides and downsides. When we find downsides, we try and adjust the law so that it seems to be more in line with what we will learn in a couple of weeks as libertarian freedom. Libertarian is not liberal. It's something quite different. It grows out of an English philosopher named John Locke, and later comes to us in the form of capitalism from Adam Smith. So today I want to talk about the theories that we use, or that we develop through applying the principles to what we think are the right values that we want to have in our society. Lying, stealing, cheating, raping, robbing, red light, green light. So we're going to talk about values today, okay? Okay. Once again, I encourage you to take notes if you have them. It's very helpful. So the first thing we want to talk about today is something called value theory. Theories that give us the values that we want to incorporate into law. Value theory is that part of moral philosophy that focuses on questions about what is intrinsically valuable. Intrinsic means it's good in and of itself. You don't need anything to be added to it. Health, wealth, and pleasure are things that are important. You might have all the wealth in the world and end up with stage 4 lung cancer where you're literally going to drown, and all that wealth will not do you any good. But it would be nice to have until you get to the end of life. You may have poor health and no wealth, and you can't afford any kind of treatment. And you may find that you have pleasure in your life. We'll talk about pleasure today. But that pleasure may not provide you with any of the other necessities that we feel like life provides us or could provide us with. Everybody with me on that? So value theory is the examination of these goods, these values that are either intrinsic or not intrinsic. What's intrinsically valuable is worth pursuing for its own sake, and a good human life will contain much that meets this description. Happiness is on almost everybody's list. Anybody want less happiness than more? Interesting. So then we come to our first discussion of the semester. There's no wrong questions. There's no wrong answers. We're going to have groupthink. I have both fingers. If I call on you, it's not to humiliate you or somehow pigeonhole you, but I want conversation. So the key question for this week is, what is happiness?
Something that fills you with delight.
Something that fills you with delight. Good. What's delight?
I'll put it in my terms. It just gives you a good feeling.
That's okay.
Like a good feeling inside of you. Like if there's something negative in life that you can feel it. It gives you like a negative vibe. And then the opposite gives you a good feeling. That way.
Sure. That works for me. Who else? What's happiness?
I would think fulfillment.
Fulfillment.
Yeah.
What's fulfillment mean? That's the right answer. What's fulfillment mean?
I mean, in my thought process of it would just be generally being happy with everything that's going on within oneself and feeling joy from everyday simple decisions.
Okay.
And
That's cool.
A sense of peace and calmness.
Peace and calmness. Peace about what? That's the right answer. Peace about what?
There's peace in oneself.
In yourself. And calmness. That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, a lot of these we don't think about, but we know what it is. We just don't have a way to really define it. What else is happiness?
Helping others you care about. Happiness. That's not happiness. You said delight, right? So delight and comfort in their lives.
Sure, helping other people. It's called altruism. Doing things that make other people feel good. When you raise your kids, you're going to find out what it's like to sacrifice too. And when you make them happy, you're happy too. Unless it's a very costly sacrifice. Go ahead.
I feel like being content goes along with fulfillment.
What does content mean?
Being able to sit back and realize what you have, and then truly take appreciation for that.
Appreciation for your...
What you have.
satisfaction of outcomes.
Sure. What does satisfaction mean?
Kind of goes along with being content, you are happy with an outcome, and it's what you desire.
Sure. So I desire a Porsche. I'm not going to challenge you. I want to make an example. I desire a Porsche and I end up driving a Chevrolet. Am I happy?
You could be. Yeah.
I could be. I have a car. I can go back and forth.
You'd be happier if you had a Porsche.
I'd be real happy if I had another Porsche, yeah. One that didn't know how to go faster than the speed limit. I'm not into that anymore. Ashanti, you raise your hand. Say again? Happiness is what you make of it. Huh. So are we involved in happiness, or does happiness just happen to us? I mean, happiness could happen to you. Say what? Both. Both. Huh. Interesting. Well, that's very good. Another important view claims that our lives are good to the extent we get whatever we want. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of whatever that means. We've talked about happiness. So, someone wants to give their wealth to the world, and they're happy. And someone wants to earn all the wealth in the world, and they're happy. Is that the same happiness? Well, they're happy. Right? Milli Vanilli, don't be sad, be happy. They're happy from what they do. But it seems like those are two opposite things.
So people with the same source can't really have the same happiness. They look at it from their own unique angles, even if they have the exact same position. So
happiness depends on your perspective. If that makes you happy, giving away your wealth or accumulating the wealth. Life. Most people don't think about life. What is the measure of a life? We'll learn that when we study Aristotle. It's called moral virtue. He thinks you need to live a whole life before you can decide if life was worth living, if you're really happy. Well, how do we measure life? Is it momentary? Is it stuff? Is it sequential behavior that builds? You start out with a career here, and you go there and there and there, and finally you get to the very top, and you're happy.
That's an interesting thought. Only because like my outlook on life, it tends to be like, yesterday is done. I can't really go back. So whatever happened, I gotta deal with it. I don't know about tomorrow, but today's all I got, so.
That's a really interesting point. So for some people, happiness is built upon the past and you're moving towards the future. Other people, it's built upon the past and I don't want to go down that path anymore because it didn't make me happy. Yet other accounts offer a variety of intrinsic goods rather than just one or two, like honor, code, duty, virtue, caring, benevolence, altruism. Maybe life is a composite of variety of things that we think in the end will cause us to be happy. Or maybe some people get to the end of their life and they don't think life is worth living. They're very unhappy. I've been there for a lot of people on their deathbed. They just angry, sad, bitter people. Life did not go their way. And they're not happy people. So value theory causes us to sit down and examine things that are important and try to come to some conclusion. No lying, no stealing, no cheating, no raping, no robbing, red light, green light. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Why should that be important? Well, if you understood the rules of the courtroom, you'd understand that isn't important. Most decisions are based on who tells a better story. It's got very little to do with the truth, and I'll go into that when we get into the law. By the way, you will study case law in here. It's not difficult. You'll get it in two Russias and capitalism and euthanasia. So I will give you those things that we can take a look at. It's not hard. It's not like a lawyer makes a document. You have to take it to another lawyer to translate it. Case law, Supreme Court case law is very easy to understand. I'll give you all you need to do well on your quizzes. So value theory is the place where we start, people. Value theory explores the nature of the good life. Question central to value theory: what makes a human life go well? What in life is worth pursuing for its own sake, and is happiness the ultimate good? Value theory has three aspects that we'll study this semester. One is called hedonism. That's the one we'll deal with this week. Hedonism deals with happiness, both physical and intellectual pleasures, is the only thing that's valuable for its own sake. And we're going to have four ethicists that we're going to study today. We'll start with Epicurus. He's a Greek, an ancient Greek. He's got a theory of the good life that's based on hedonism, but his idea of pleasure is much different than John Stuart Mill. This is a British philosopher, learned from a teacher named Jeremy Bentham, and for him the only thing that's valuable is intellectual and physical pleasures, and I'll describe the difference between the two. Then we'll deal with Robert Nozick. He passed away in 2002 of cancer. He built something called an experience machine, like the Matrix. If you could have all your dreams come true, would that make you happy? And finally, Jean Kazaz, a feminist, probably the best that we'll study this week. She talks about the things that are necessity or necessary to make life happy. And she has a variety of them. And they're core beliefs. They're not the only beliefs that we'll talk about. So we'll talk about